Welcome tonight. Glad that you are here with us for this time of worship together. I kid every time that there is a football game on right in the middle of our service because, we can find out where people, really are. But some of you are like, I got the system beat because I'm just going to have my game on my phone right in front of me, and I'll just look down, and if, the sound turns on, then I'm sorry in advance. Please don't do that. Let's just look into the Word together, and let's see what God has for us. Let's bow together and pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for your kindness to us. We thank you that you call us out of darkness and into light, that you bring us from spiritual death into spiritual new life. You give us a new identity. You welcome us into your family as adopted children. So not only are we citizens of heaven, but we are children within your home. Thank you for the opportunity that we have in the narrative of Ruth to see how this can play out in real life situations, how it did play out, and the implications for us today as we strive to walk humbly before you and be ambassadors of your kingdom in a world that is filled with darkness and an amazing amount of chaos. May the beauty of the gospel come through in what we look at tonight from your word. In Jesus' name, amen. So if you've been with us before, as I said last week, and you're used to a bulletin that has all sorts of notes and fill in the blank, that's not what we're doing through this series at all. It's free reign on whatever you want to write in along the way. But I want to encourage you tonight as we start into Ruth 2 to be thinking about character. Character is what I want us to kind of focus in right at the beginning. Because in this story tonight, we see the beauty of Ruth's character, but we also see the generosity and power of a man named Boaz. Now here's what I want us to see about character tonight. Character is revealed when attitude and action play out. When attitude and actions play out, character is revealed, not aspirations. Aspirations are like, I would love to do that. Someday I will do that, not now, or God knows my heart. See, character is revealed and played out when attitude and action are revealed. And that's what we see in the story of Ruth chapter 2. And so the way that we ended last week is that Ruth is the daughter-in-law of Naomi. Naomi comes back to her people in Bethlehem, which is known as the house of bread, because she's heard that the famine is over and it's harvest season. And Naomi's like, it's time to come back because they had gone to Moab. And in Moab, Naomi lost her husband, and then she lost her two sons. She was left with two daughter-in-laws. One was Orpah, and Orpah decided to stay in Moab, and then Ruth, who decided to cling to Naomi. And the loyalty of Ruth plays itself out in beautiful ways in chapter 2. As they come back, the people welcome them back. I'm like, oh, Naomi, you're back. Naomi, you're back. And she says to the people, don't call me Naomi, because I left full, but now I'm coming back empty. Call me Mara, which means bitter. Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. A couple of notes here on verse 1 is that word relative in the Hebrew might mean relative, as in an actual relative of Elimelech, which we find out is true, but really is more about friend in the context of verse 1. Naomi had a friend of her husband's, a worthy man. The word worthy means important and powerful. There was an important and powerful man named Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite, and if you have your own Bible, you kind of want to underline every time that it says Moabite, Ruth the Moabite. You might as well say Ruth the outsider, Ruth, she doesn't belong here. She doesn't belong in this place called Bethlehem. She's an outsider. She is a Moabite. And through chapter 2, the writer just makes it so obvious. She doesn't belong. She's an outsider. She's an outcast. Verse 2, and Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. In Ruth 2, the word favor in the original language of Hebrew means grace. Favor means grace. Grace is a gift. And she says, I want to go out in the field and I want to glean. The idea of glean has historical roots even before the time that Ruth was written. And it was when the harvest season happened. Here's basically the paraphrase of what it means. Gleaning is that the workers would go out into the field on behalf of the owner of the field, and they would harvest the different grains. They would scoop them all up. But they were, by God's law, they were only allowed to go to a certain point. They had to leave what was on the outside closest to the outer perimeter of the landowner for people to come along. The poor, the sojourner, people that didn't belong there, leave some for them because they need it. But gleaning means that we're going to be using that outside area that's left over. We're going to find the grain that we want, the grain that we need. We're going to go there. But the workers are also going to leave some behind, and we can pick up the scraps. So gleaning is another word for gathering grain. Now, if you've been with us down to the Dominican Republic, we work in sugarcane villages with people in communities which may make they've really been faithful and worked hard and have been there for several years, they might make $3 a day. And we work in the sugarcane fields with the people, not actually with the machetes, but with the people, and build relationships with them. And I remember just a couple years ago, riding in the bus, coming into a community, and the harvesters were out with their machetes. They worked for about 13 hours a day cutting down sugarcane. And I remember looking on to them working together. They do a massive amount of land at a time. In one day, they could cover acres upon acres, just 3, 4, or 5 of them. But there's nothing really respectable about those who are actually gathering the grain. They're workers. They're basically indentured servants. They're basically slaves to the owner. And if they don't work for the owner, then they don't get provisions of their own. And I remember us riding in the van and looking over to the side, and there was one worker in the middle of his shift who out in the middle of the field was just squatting down to go to the bathroom in the wide open of everyone that was around. The people that are working in the field for generations, for thousands of years, the workers don't have the highest of class. Now, here's why I bring that up with such detail. Because Ruth is saying, I want to go out into the field and glean, and I am lower on the priority list than even those that are in the field working for the owner. I know that my place is well below them. She goes out into the field to glean. Right before that, at the end of verse 2, she said to her, "Go, my daughter," Naomi said. Verse 3, so she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. That was established back in verse 1. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. And he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And the reapers answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the young Moabite woman." Remember, she doesn't belong. She's an outsider who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. Ruth said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers." So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. So what do we see right off the bat of Ruth? Ruth is humble. She knows her position, that she's below even the reapers who are working in the fields, but she's also a hard worker. She knows that if I don't come back with some sort of gathering of grain, then Naomi and we're not going to eat. And we've just gone through this time where we're hungry. And we don't have husbands to provide for us. We don't have any sort of stability. Remember in the context, as we talked about last week, if you're a woman and you don't have a lineage and you don't have land, you don't have anything. And Ruth is so determined. She's loyal to Naomi. She's like, I'm not just going to sit off the side and wait for handouts. No, that's not how it works. I need to go out and gather for myself. And so she goes out to gather, but she's working hard. And the man in charge of the reapers passes this on to Boaz, who is this worthy, important, and powerful man. Verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, now listen, my daughter. Think about the identity right there. This is almost scandalous, the identity that Boaz is bringing out. My daughter, Boaz says to Ruth. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. There's going to be other gleaners here. Stay close to them. Stay in this field. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Stay close to them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Now, what Boaz is doing, this is incredible. It's so hard for us to see in a context like we live in today. Boaz realizes that if Ruth doesn't glean, if she doesn't gather the grain that she needs, that she's not going to eat. Now, the man in charge of the reapers has passed on the word to Boaz that she's been a hard worker. She hasn't overdone her bounds. She hasn't gone out of her way to pay much attention. She's probably got her head down. She's just working away at the fields, gathering what she can along the way. And Boaz is saying, hey, I just want you to know that the reapers who are here, the men, they're not allowed to touch you. Just imagine the danger that an outsider would face if she was in the field in a land that didn't belong to her. Boaz is saying, hey, I've talked to the men, you're going to be safe. But also in this context, and like much of the world, women, if they're going to cook or if they're going to clean or if they're going to do any laundry, they have to walk a long way with big, heavy buckets to gather the water to come back so that they have it. Sometimes in some cultures, they are walking and getting water for hours at a time to bring back just to do their regular activity. We can't fathom this because we go to a sink and behold, lift up this little thing. I mean, now they have like touchless ones. You're like, whoop, you know, your hand just comes close and water comes down. We don't have that in our house, but we have that now. That's so foreign, what they're doing here. And Boaz is saying, hey, you don't have to be like the women who have to go and gather. In fact, I want you to go and get your water straight from where the reapers would get their water, from where the men are. I'm going to give you a place of prominence in my field, even though you don't belong here. This is crazy. But then comes the moment in verse 10 that is so interesting. Anyone know what DTR means? Define the relationship, right? Well, this is what she's doing almost right away. Just think about in her humility and her loyalty to Naomi, within her hard work that she had. She says, she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to Boaz, why have I found favor? Why have I found grace in your eyes? That you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner. She might as well say, I'm a Moabite. I don't belong here. I'm the least of the least in this land. Why have you found favor with me? Why would you do this? This doesn't make any sense. Why would you pull me out to do that? She is bowing down to show honor, which was custom in this culture. In verse 11, Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land in Moab and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Now, I want us just to sit on this verse, because what Boaz is doing, he is talking to Ruth, but he's also pronouncing a blessing. He's also pronouncing a prayer over. So if you can just get the imagery of what this looks like, Ruth is bowing down to the ground in front of this worthy man, this important, this powerful man. Ruth is bowing down right before him. And he starts to basically pray over her. The Lord bless you. I know what you've done. You left the land that was your home. You came with your mother-in-law knowing that she didn't have a husband, that she didn't have any land. You knew that this wasn't going to be easy for you, and yet you came. And you have honored her. You've been loyal to her. You've been a friend of her. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord find extra reward for you. There's something powerful about prayer. When we see need around us, how often do we just go right to praying for the need? You see someone that's homeless on the side of the street, how often do you I'm just going to pray? Or just kind of turn and look the other way, this might be dangerous, and walk a little bit faster. I've read stories about what could happen in this town. I don't know what's involved in this. We all can be susceptible to that tension that plays within our minds. What should we do? How should we respond? Boaz is looking on and saying, this girl's faithful. She's loyal. She's a friend. She's taking care of her mother-in-law, and she doesn't have to. And by Boaz praying, his heart, his will is softened, and ultimately for his hand to provide. Oftentimes, the people that we pray for, God does something within our heart that changes us in such a way that we are the ones by which the means of blessings flow through. God uses us to be a blessing to other people. Now look at how she responds. Verse 13, then she said, I have found favor, I have found grace in your eyes, my Lord. For you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. I'm not even to the level of your servant, and yet you have spoken so kindly to me. I don't deserve it. This is grace. I can't earn it. This is grace. Verse 14, and at mealtime Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had leftovers. Now, I don't know what the doggy bag was like that night. I don't know what it was made of. I don't know what it was like. But this is even crazy. He's not only praying for her, but he's saying, come over here. Sit down among the reapers. Hey, I've prepared food for you. Maybe not I personally, but my people have prepared food. Sit down. Have the best of the best. I know you're hungry. Be filled. Be satisfied. Boaz is going way out of his way. To those that are looking on, it makes no sense whatsoever. Now, some would say, well, Boaz just had an eye for her because she must have been really good looking. Man, she probably was really attractive to him, and so he was going out of his way because he wanted something. As the story unfolds, that's not true. The character of Boaz is coming out. And in his character, it's not just an attitude, but it's playing out in actions. He's not saying, I'm waiting for someone else to step in. I'm going to step in. Ruth, come over here. Have a seat. Be filled. You're even going to have leftovers. Verse 15. When she rose to glean, she rose because she has to gather more to take back to Naomi. Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean, let her gather, even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. Meaning, don't look on to her with disappointment. Don't look on to her with disapproval. Don't even give her some sort of a look that's like, who are you, you outsider, you foreigner, you don't belong here. Don't do that. Don't give her a look the negative way. No, show favor, extend grace to her. Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some of the bundles for her and leave it for her to glean. And do not rebuke her. He gave her dignity, not just giving her a basket and say, hey, take this home. She knew that she was going to gather herself. She kept on working. She was faithful. She wasn't complaining. She just kept on gathering. And Boaz said, and do not rebuke her. And this word rebuke means don't stop her. Don't laugh at her. Don't stop her. Don't laugh at her. Show her dignity. So she gleaned. She gathered in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley, which is somewhere between 25 and 50 pounds. Most conservatively, probably around 30 pounds is what she had. Now, at the surface, it's like, well, what does that mean? Well, right before we go to verse 18, here's what this means. Out of all the people that would come and glean, The best case scenario on average is that the gleaners would come back with about 1/15 to 1/30 of what Ruth was able to gather. Think about that. It's almost like in the New Testament when we see Jesus serve bread and fish, and there's an abundance, there's overflowing. Ruth is coming back with 15 to 30 times what an average person gleaning would have gotten, even among the best of the reapers. She's coming back with way more than she would have ever hoped, dreamed, or imagined. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law, Naomi, saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where did you work? Where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The man's name with whom I work today is Boaz." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." Now, this idea of redeemer, redeem means to buy back. And in that culture, that if you work because you couldn't make a living anywhere else, you would just give yourself into slavery. Old Testament slavery wasn't slavery like today. You would say, "I'm going to go and work, and this is the way that I'm going to take care of my family." And a redeemer could buy you out of that. He could take care of you. The whole story will unwrap much more detail next week as we go into chapter 3. But the idea of what Naomi is saying is, not only is this man worthy, not only is he important and powerful, but he is a relative of Elimelech's. And he has the right, he has the authority, and he has the capability of buying us back. And even though that we don't have land, and even though we don't have a lineage, Boaz is one who has all of the means necessary to take care of what we need. Verse 21. And Ruth the Moabite said, "Besides, he said to me, 'You shall keep close to my young men until they have finished all the harvest,'" which is typically a few months. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted." So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. And there are several things I really want to pull from the narrative of chapter 2. But some of those things that I want to go back to is the character of Ruth. Let's start there. Now, Ruth's name means friendly or loyal. And she lives out that very name in the circumstances that she's in. She is a friend of the man in charge of the reaper. She asked humbly, she said, "Hey, could I glean here today?" And she worked hard along the way. So not only was she humble and friendly, knowing her place, but she also was a hard worker. And the beauty of what we see in Ruth is the beauty of submission. And in our culture, submission just sounds like such a dirty S word. But submission biblically means I'm going to align myself positionally so that the waterfall of blessing will flow over me. I know that I don't deserve it. I know that I can't earn it, but I'm going to faithfully trust that there is someone who is more powerful than me, who is more important than me, is going to bless me. And in the story, Boaz is that. And Ruth remains faithful. She could have came back with 15 to 30 times the amount of what a normal reaper would have had or a normal gleaner would have brought home. And yet she could have came back and said, "Hey, that's enough for the next month or two. We should be fine. I ain't going to do that anymore. I'm just going to put my feet up. I worked hard yesterday." But faithfully, she just goes out and goes out and goes out and reaps, gleans, gathers, not complaining at all. We don't see any of that in the narrative. But we also see Boaz. And the character of Boaz, he doesn't have to go to the field, and yet he does. He doesn't have to talk to the main reaper, and yet he did. He didn't have to listen to the story of Naomi coming in and who is this foreigner, who's this Moabite, who's this outsider, and yet he listens with great detail. He didn't have to encounter Ruth and give a prayer over her. He didn't have to bless her. He didn't have to reward her. He didn't have to invite her to the table, and yet he does. And we can look on a story like this, even though that this story has nothing to do directly with you or with me, but we can look on this story and say, who do we most relate to in the story? Do we most relate to Ruth, the outsider, the outcast, who needs provisions brought our way? Or do we most relate to Boaz, the one who has the means and the power to bless? A few years ago, we talked about what it means to live in a culture like our own. And in this room, regardless of your income, we live within the top 5% of people who have ever walked the planet. You and I, you might say, well, the paycheck just came in. It's not as much as I hoped it would be. It's not what I wanted it to be. Oh, times are tough. The challenge that we face is we tend to overspend instead of look at what we actually have and live underneath those means. We tend to overspend. So we feel like we don't have that much. And yet we still live within the top 5%. Some of us in this room would live within the top 1%. If your household income is over $100,000 a year, you're over the 1%, or you're within the 1% of the world's economy. Over half of the globe live on about $2 a day. So we can look on and say, man, I feel like an outcast. I feel like I'm hungry. I feel like I don't have everything that I need. We can feel like Ruth, but the reality is that it's misleading because we're really far more like Boaz. We have an opportunity to bless almost every single day. And yet, either our busyness or not having the eyes to see the opportunities in front of us, we don't. There's widows among us. There's orphans within our midst, not just within this room, but out there. And God calls us to work among the poor and take care of the orphan and take care of the widow. That's what he's called us to do. We're meant to be a people like Boaz who live differently from the rest of the world. And sometimes we just need to stop and say, am I too busy? Am I just overlooking the blessings that God has already given me? Because he's blessed us all. You might be in a season right now where you don't know where that blessing is coming from. You might be looking on it and say, I'm in between work, or my boss isn't the boss that I want, or the system hasn't treated me right. You might be in a place where your physical needs aren't what you want them to be. And God is still faithful. God is still good. God is still working. And oftentimes he works through people like you and through people like me. As we look at this story, we have opportunity not only individually, but collectively to be the church so that the people can look on, like Jesus said, and know that we're his followers. Why? Because of how we love each other and how we love those who are outsiders, those who are outcasts. But the question tonight is, do we have an attitude that leads to action? Or do we just say, I hope so, someday, maybe I'll step in the way that I should? Or remember that time last year, man, I just gathered all of this food and I emptied out the pantry and I emptied out the closet and I gave that away. God, that should count. My one-time drive-by blessing, that should count for long term. I should just have to do that maybe once a year. No, this is a lifestyle. And that's what Boaz is modeling for us. But the story doesn't stop here. The story continues. And next week, we're going to talk about how our plans require patience. The best laid plans require patience for God's timing. We can question his goodness. We can question his timing. But God's still good and his timing is still right. And the story unfolds this way as Ruth and Naomi see the blessings of God through the people around them. Right now, the main focus is right on Boaz. And I want to pause here at the end of this sermon to say, where are you at in your heart? And I want to just ask you, look on the other side of the bulletin. If you have a bulletin, and there are different questions that are here. But I want you to look at number 2 in those questions. And I want you just to ponder this where you are. What are some specific obstacles preventing you from consistently noticing God's ongoing blessings in your life? Is it ingratitude? You think you deserve more? Rationalization? Yeah, you believe these blessings that come your way can just be explained away. They're just through people. Don't miss this. The blessings that God pours out on his people almost always flow through his people. There's a ministry of presence. Later on in our time together, we're going to pray for Dana. In the ministry of presence, Mr. John has been so faithful. Every single chemo treatment, driving her, sitting with her, taking notes, being there. There's a ministry of presence. God's blessings flow through people. But sometimes we just need to stop and reflect. Say, God, how are you working? How are you blessing? God, give me eyes to see. Tonight, you might be in a place where genuinely you are more like Ruth. You feel like an outsider. You feel like an outcast. You don't know where you belong. And Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary, and find rest. So we're going to spend a few minutes just contemplating the events of chapter 2 together, thinking about the blessings in our life and thinking about opportunities where God could use us to bless others. And then we're going to continue on in our worship together.